Adele was 72 when she first noticed it. At first it seemed harmless, just a strange chill in her toes whenever she sat too long at the kitchen table. But slowly, those cool tingles grew into something heavier. Her ankles began to swell by late afternoon, her feet felt as if they had been dipped into ice water, and climbing the stairs left her breathless. One evening, as she rubbed her legs and tried to hide her discomfort, her daughter leaned over and whispered, "Mom, you should have that checked." That gentle nudge led Adele to her doctor's office, where she heard words that made her chest tighten. "Your circulation isn't what it should be. If you don't make changes, you could face serious problems." For Adele, those words became the turning point. She had spent her life caring for others, raising 2 children, working in her small family bakery, and putting her husband's health ahead of her own. She was the sort of woman who always carried a thermos of tea in her purse, who still liked to knead bread by hand just to feel the dough soften under her palms. Yet in the quiet moments, she admitted she had neglected herself. She ate on the run, sat for hours behind the counter, and told herself the heaviness in her legs was simply part of getting older. Now, for the first time, she saw how quickly small habits had taken her body hostage. That night, Adele sat by her bedroom window watching the streetlights flicker on. She thought about the friends she had already lost, to strokes, to heart trouble, to illnesses that seemed to come suddenly but had really been building for years. She wondered if she would be next, and then something shifted. Rather than sinking into fear, she felt a surprising clarity. Her doctor's warning wasn't just about sickness, it was an invitation to rediscover herself, to give her body the same patience and care she had always given to her bread, her garden, and her family. The next morning, Adele made a small but powerful choice. Instead of slipping straight into her kitchen chair with her tea, she stepped outside. The morning air was cool, the pavement still damp with dew. She walked slowly at first, each step deliberate, her calves burning slightly from disuse. Yet with each block she covered, she imagined the blood in her legs moving more freely, like a stream unclogging after a storm. She returned home with flushed cheeks, her heart beating just a little faster, and for the first time in months, she felt alive inside her own body. Her journey didn't stop with walking. Adele began to weave small rituals into her days, rolling her feet against a bottle while reading, pausing between batches of bread to rise on her toes, setting her phone alarm to remind her to stand and stretch. None of it was dramatic, and yet each movement became a promise. She started to feel her legs grow stronger, the swelling less intense, her nights less restless. More than anything, she felt a quiet pride blooming again. She was not helpless against time. She was learning step by step to move her blood, to feed her heart, and to honor the body that had carried her through decades of work, love, and living. When Adele later told her story to her grandchildren, she didn't use medical terms or long explanations. She simply said, "I listened, my body was calling, and I finally listened." That simple truth is where her healing began, and it is where yours can begin too. Adele sat at the edge of her bed one morning, staring at her feet as if they belonged to someone else. They looked puffy, the skin shiny and stretched, and when she pressed a finger into her ankle, the small dent lingered longer than it should have. She tried to laugh it off, telling herself it was just water weight, but in her chest she felt a quiet dread. Her mother had struggled with swelling late in life, and Adele remembered how it limited her until she could barely walk across the room. That memory clung to her as she pulled on her socks, feeling the tight fabric dig into her skin. Later that day, while preparing dough in the bakery, she nearly stumbled. It wasn't the flour dust making her dizzy, it was her legs, heavy and weak, as though they couldn't keep pace with her mind. A customer, an old neighbor named Ruth, noticed and asked gently, "Are you feeling all right?" Adele smiled, brushed it aside, but her heart sank. That night, her daughter insisted on taking her to the doctor. The examination was calm but firm. "Adele, what you're experiencing is edema. It's linked to circulation, and at your age, ignoring it could put you at risk for clots or worse." The words echoed in her mind long after they left the clinic. At home, Adele found herself sitting in silence, listening to her own heartbeat as if it might vanish any second. She thought about the bread she baked each morning, the way yeast needed air, the way dough had to be worked to come alive. How strange, she realized, that she had forgotten her own body needed the same kind of attention. Just like dough left untouched, her blood had grown stagnant, and now her legs were reminding her in ways she couldn't deny. That night, she made a quiet promise. She would no longer sit passively while her body called for help. The doctor had explained a simple truth. Movement itself was medicine. Walking, even in small doses, acted like a pump that pushed blood upward against gravity. Adele pictured it vividly, the muscles in her calves squeezing, her veins opening like little doors to let the blood pass. It was humbling, almost poetic, to think that every step could be a lifeline. She decided she would take that first step at sunrise. The next morning, Adele slipped into her worn sneakers and stepped outside. The air was cool, scented faintly of lilac from her neighbor's hedge. Her ankles felt stiff, but she began moving slowly down the street. Each step was deliberate, her breath matching her pace, and though her legs ached, she felt something stirring, like a stream beginning to flow after being blocked by winter ice. When she returned home, cheeks flushed, she leaned against the counter and laughed softly to herself. It wasn't much, just a short walk, but it felt like the beginning of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Adele's daughter Clara watched her mother carefully over the next few weeks. Each time Adele mentioned her morning walks, Clara smiled with encouragement, but she also noticed the small winces her mother tried to hide when she eased into her chair. One evening after dinner, Clara sat beside her and gently took her hand. "Mom," she said softly, "I can tell it still hurts. You don't have to go through this alone." Adele wanted to brush it off, to insist she was fine, but something in her daughter's eyes, half worry, half determination, made her pause. For the first time in years, she admitted out loud, "It scares me, Clara. The swelling, the heaviness. It feels like my body isn't mine anymore." Clara squeezed her hand. "Then let's face it together," she said. And true to her word, she began walking with Adele every morning. At first, Adele protested, embarrassed by her short pace and frequent stops, but Clara never rushed her. They walked side by side in silence, listening to the rhythm of their footsteps. Sometimes Clara would point out the morning robins or a neighbor's blooming roses, little distractions that lifted the weight from Adele's thoughts. Slowly, Adele began to notice her daughter's presence not as a reminder of her weakness, but as a kind of steady anchor. One morning, as they rounded the corner back to their street, Adele realized her ankles felt lighter. It wasn't a miracle. Her legs still carried a dull ache, but the swelling was less angry, the skin not as tight. She told Clara, who smiled like she'd known all along this small change was coming. "That's the power of moving blood, Mom," Clara said. "Every step helps your heart do its job." Adele thought about that phrase, helping her heart, and it stayed with her long after Clara left for work. It was during one of their follow-up appointments that Adele's doctor explained something that struck her deeply. "When you walk, Adele, your calf muscles are like little pumps," he said, sketching a simple diagram on a notepad. "They squeeze the veins and push blood upward against gravity, back to your heart. It's why walking is one of the most powerful tools for circulation." Adele stared at the sketch, her mind spinning. She realized she had always thought of walking as just a way to get from one place to another, not as an act of healing. For the first time, she felt grateful for her legs, not resentful of their heaviness, but proud of their resilience. That night at the family dinner table, Adele told the story of the calf pumps. Her grandchildren giggled at the phrase, bouncing in their chairs, pretending to pump their legs. The whole family laughed, and for a moment, the fear that had been haunting her seemed to soften. Clara leaned in and whispered, "See, Mom? You're teaching us too." Adele hadn't thought of it that way, but as she watched her grandchildren mimic her new exercises, she realized she wasn't just fighting for her own health. She was quietly shaping theirs. Weeks passed, and the walks grew longer. Adele found herself noticing the world again. The way the light filtered through the trees, the smell of fresh bread drifting from the bakery she used to work in. Each morning was no longer just about pushing blood through her legs. It was about reclaiming pieces of herself she had forgotten. She moved slower than Clara, yes, but she moved, and that movement was a quiet rebellion against the fear that once held her still. When Adele lay down at night, she placed a pillow under her feet, raising them slightly above her heart, another simple tip her doctor had given. The first time she tried it, she felt silly, but as the nights went by, she noticed she woke with less stiffness, her ankles less swollen. She smiled to herself, realizing she was learning a new language, the language of her body's needs. And for the first time in years, she felt like she was listening. It was a humid afternoon when Adele sat in her doctor's office again, the quiet ticking of the wall clock filling the space between his words. He had spoken gently, but what Adele heard felt heavier than anything she'd carried in her bakery baskets. "This swelling in your ankles isn't just about being on your feet, Adele," he explained. It's a sign that fluid is leaking into the tissues. We call it edema. And when circulation struggles, it doesn't just stay in the legs. It can affect the eyes, the kidneys, even the heart. Adele swallowed hard, the word edema sounding clinical, almost too neat for the fear it stirred. Her mother's face came back to her, how her legs had looked like they were wrapped in invisible weights, how she had complained of blurred vision before her passing. Adele sat frozen, staring at her hands, wondering if the same story was beginning to unfold inside her. The doctor must have seen the shadow cross her face because he leaned forward and added, "But you are catching it early. That gives us a chance to change the story." That night, Adele couldn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, her feet tingling beneath the covers. She tried to shift her mind to lighter things, the smell of baked cinnamon rolls, the laughter of her grandchildren, but her thoughts always circled back to one fear. What if this swelling grows worse? What if I lose more than just comfort? She turned on her side and wept quietly, not wanting to wake Clara in the next room. The next morning, Clara noticed her mother's eyes, puffy and tired. She poured her tea and asked softly, "Bad night?" Adele nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "The doctor said it could reach my eyes, Clara. I can't imagine not seeing you, not seeing the children." Clara reached across the table and held her mother's hand firmly. "Then we fight it, Mom, step by step, just like we've been doing." Something shifted in Adele's chest in that moment. She realized fear could either paralyze her or propel her. She chose the latter. She decided to treat her swelling not as a curse, but as a message, a clear signal from her body urging her to act. She began drinking more water, cutting back on the salty crackers she used to snack on absent-mindedly at the bakery. It wasn't dramatic, but each glass of water felt like a small cleansing, each skipped handful of salt a gift to her veins. Clara helped too. She ordered a pair of compression stockings, explaining how they applied gentle pressure to keep blood from pooling in her legs. Adele grimaced at first when she slipped them on. They were snug, almost uncomfortably so, but after a few hours, she noticed her ankles didn't balloon as they usually did by late afternoon. "They feel like a hug for my legs," she admitted with a small laugh. And Clara smiled, relieved to see her mother embracing the change. One evening, as Adele sat in her armchair with her legs propped on a pillow, she felt the strangest thing. Gratitude. Gratitude for the ache that had forced her to slow down. Gratitude for the swelling that had brought her closer to her daughter's care. Gratitude even for the stockings that pinched but protected. She thought again of her mother, and instead of fear, she felt resolve. She whispered into the quiet room, "I will not walk the same path. I will walk my own." The swelling did not disappear overnight, but something deeper began to heal. Adele no longer saw her body as an enemy. She began to see it as a fragile friend in need of attention. And with each small adjustment, an extra walk, a glass of water, the gentle squeeze of her stockings, she was writing a new chapter, one that didn't end with loss, but with renewal. One gray morning, Adele found herself restless. She had taken her walk, sipped her tea, and even folded the laundry, yet her chest felt tight and her hands cold. Clara noticed immediately. "Mom, are you nervous about something?" Adele shook her head, though she knew the truth. For weeks she had been carrying a quiet pressure. What if the swelling returned worse? What if her progress slipped away? What if her body betrayed her again? The worries clung to her like fog, and even as she moved, her heart never seemed to rest. Later that week, during a follow-up visit, Adele's doctor asked gently, "Do you often feel tense, even when nothing is happening?" Adele nodded, embarrassed. "Yes, it's like I'm bracing for something bad." He leaned forward, explaining softly, "Stress itself can narrow your blood vessels. It's called vasoconstriction. When your body stays in that fight or flight mode, the vessels tighten and circulation suffers. That's why sometimes your hands and feet feel cold. It's your blood being held back." The idea startled Adele. She had always imagined her poor circulation as a physical problem, something in her legs alone. Now she realized her thoughts, her fears, even her worries were shaping her blood flow. She left the clinic unsettled, but also curious. Could calming her mind truly calm her body? That evening, Clara suggested something simple. "Let's try breathing together," she said, guiding her mother to sit comfortably. "Inhale slow, count to 5, then exhale even slower." Adele laughed at first. It felt silly to count her breaths like a child. But as she closed her eyes and followed her daughter's gentle voice, something shifted. Her shoulders dropped, her chest loosened, and when she opened her eyes, the room seemed brighter. Clara smiled knowingly. You see, Mom? Your body listens when you breathe. In the days that followed, Adele began weaving this ritual into her mornings. She would sit by the window, close her eyes, and let her breath guide her. At first, her mind wandered, worries about bills, errands, and aches, but slowly, the rhythm steadied her. Inhaling filled her chest with calm, and each exhale felt like she was letting go of invisible weights. It was not dramatic, but it was real. Her feet tingled less, her chest no longer carried the same tightness, and she found herself smiling without effort. One afternoon, her grandson Daniel burst into the living room, catching Adele mid-breath. "Grandma, are you sleeping?" he asked with a giggle. She chuckled, pulling him close. "No, sweetheart, I'm teaching my body to feel safe again." Daniel tilted his head, not quite understanding, but he copied her anyway, breathing in deeply, puffing out his cheeks, then exhaling with a whoosh. The two of them laughed until their bellies ached, but Adele knew something sacred had just passed between them. The simple act of showing him how stillness could heal. A few weeks later, Adele realized she had not experienced the same nightly dread that once kept her awake. She still had swelling from time to time, but her heart no longer raced with panic. Instead, when fear crept in, she would pause, close her eyes, and let her breath slow her pulse. Each time she did, she imagined her blood vessels loosening, her circulation flowing like a river free of stones. She began to see stress not as a prison, but as a signal, a chance to return to her breath and reclaim her calm. One evening, sitting with Clara by the garden, Adele whispered, "I never thought air itself could be medicine." Clara smiled, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. Sometimes the simplest things are the most powerful. And in that quiet moment, with the sun setting and her chest rising in steady rhythm, Adele believed it. Adele never thought of herself as a disciplined woman. She used to laugh and say that the only schedule she ever kept was the bakery's opening hours. Yet as the weeks went by, she found herself returning to small, repeating movements, rituals that felt less like chores and more like whispers of healing. The morning walk had become her anchor, but now she layered other practices into her day, each one a thread weaving a stronger fabric. It began in the kitchen. While waiting for the kettle to boil, Adele stood on her toes, lifting her heels from the floor and lowering them again. The first time she tried, her calves cramped quickly, but she remembered her doctor's words about those muscles acting like pumps. So she tried again and again until the motion became second nature. She smiled one morning when Clara caught her, balancing like a ballerina in front of the stove. "Mom, you're making tea into a workout," Clara teased. But Adele only grinned. Every drop of blood counts. In the afternoons, when the house felt too still, Adele began sitting by the window with a small ball at her feet. She rolled it under her arches, pressing gently. The motion reminded her of kneading dough, and she found comfort in the familiar rhythm. Sometimes her mind wandered back to the bakery, the warmth of ovens, the chatter of customers. But now she saw those memories not as something lost, but as echoes of strength she was reclaiming. Her feet tingled pleasantly after each session, as if reminding her, "We are still alive, still working for you." The grandchildren noticed too. One Saturday, Daniel and his sister Lily asked if they could join her foot game. They lined up 3 marbles on the carpet, trying to pick them up with their toes, just as Adele had shown them. The room filled with laughter as marbles slipped and rolled under chairs, but for Adele, it was more than play. She was passing down something quiet yet powerful, the understanding that movement could be gentle, joyful, and healing all at once. It wasn't just her legs that changed. Adele felt her mood shift, her energy less sluggish, her mind less clouded. There was a day when she realized with surprise that she had gone the whole morning without thinking about her swelling. She still elevated her feet when resting, and yes, the stocking sometimes pinched, but her focus had shifted from fear to possibility. These rituals were no longer reminders of weakness. They were proof of her strength, proof she could shape her own days rather than surrender them. One evening, Clara brought home a small foam roller, demonstrating how Adele could gently roll her calves. Adele was hesitant at first. The cylinder looked like an odd toy, but once she tried, she understood. The pressure released tension she hadn't realized she carried, and as she rolled slowly back and forth, she felt her muscles soften and her legs grow warm. "It's like kneading myself," she joked, and Clara laughed, relieved to see her mother embracing even this new, unfamiliar tool. The transformation was not dramatic, but it was steady. Adele realized that healing was not about one grand change, but about consistency. The small, faithful acts repeated until they became part of her. Each heel raise, each ball roll, each stretch was a conversation with her body, a way of saying, I am listening now, I am here for you. And the body in turn seemed to whisper back, thank you, I can move again. One night, as Adele prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was older, yes, her hair silver, her skin lined, but there was a new glow in her cheeks, a steadiness in her posture. She lifted her nightgown slightly and pressed her finger gently into her ankle. The dent returned, but faded quicker than before, a small victory, but one she savored. For the first time in years, Adele felt not like she was waiting for illness, but walking into health. By the time spring returned, Adele had built a rhythm in her days. The walks, the breathing, the small rituals, they no longer felt like work. They felt like part of who she was becoming. Yet something inside her knew the journey wasn't finished. Her doctor had spoken once about how circulation wasn't just about movement. It was also about nourishment, about giving the body what it needed to keep the blood rich and the vessel strong. Those words stayed with her like a quiet bell, reminding her there was one more step she could take. It began in the kitchen, the same place where so many of her old habits had lived. Adele stood before her pantry one morning and really looked at it. Rows of crackers, sweet biscuits, and jars of preserved fruit stared back at her. They had been comforts in the past, little indulgences when she felt lonely after her husband passed. But now she saw them differently, as anchors that weighed her down instead of lifting her. Slowly, she began replacing them with baskets of fresh oranges, beets from the market, and handfuls of walnuts. Clara had told her how these foods were rich in nutrients that supported blood vessels and circulation. Adele didn't memorize the science, but she trusted the feeling, freshness, color, and life. Her favorite discovery was citrus. Every morning after her walk, she would slice into an orange, the zest releasing a bright fragrance that filled the kitchen. She loved the way the juice refreshed her, the way her tongue tingled as if her whole body were waking up with it. She began to think of it as her second walk of the day, one for the legs, one for the blood. She even saved the peels to steep in hot water, creating a simple tea that warmed her on cooler evenings. Clara encouraged her to add a few gentle supplements as well. At first, Adele was hesitant. Pills made her think of illness, of dependence, but her doctor reassured her. These weren't cures, just supports. A little magnesium to relax her vessels, a touch of omega-3s to keep her blood flowing smoothly. Adele agreed, though she made a promise to herself. She would never see them as the center of her healing. The real medicine was the life she was learning to live, the steps, the breath, the food, the laughter. Her family noticed the change long before she did. At a Sunday gathering, her granddaughter Lily tugged at her sleeve and said, "Grandma, your cheeks are pink." Adele laughed, touched them self-consciously, and realized it was true. Her face had color again, her energy no longer dimmed. Even her posture was different. She stood taller, moved with more certainty. She still had moments of swelling, still needed her stockings at times, but the fear that once clung to her like a shadow had loosened its grip. One evening, Adele sat by the window as the sky turned violet. She thought about the woman she had been only months before, the one who pressed her finger into her swollen ankle and felt despair rising like a tide. She thought about the nights she lay awake, fearing blindness, fearing immobility, fearing the end. And then she thought about the woman she was now, not cured, not perfect, but alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. She was moving, breathing, nourishing herself, and, most importantly, believing that her choices mattered. She whispered softly, almost as if speaking to her younger self, "You're not broken. You were just waiting to be heard." And with that, Adele closed her eyes, took a long, steady breath, and felt the warmth of her blood flowing, carrying her into the quiet comfort of renewal. The lilacs were in bloom again when Adele realized just how far she had come. The air smelled sweet and full, the same way it had on that first morning when she shuffled nervously down her street, afraid her legs might give way. But this time, her steps were different, steadier, lighter, filled with a quiet confidence that came not from speed or strength, but from the steady trust she had built in her own body. As she walked, she thought back to the woman she had been only months before, swollen ankles, cold toes, sleepless nights haunted by fear of what was coming. That woman had lived in silence, brushing off her symptoms as if they were nothing. Now she felt like a new version of herself, not because the years had reversed or the wrinkles had faded, but because she had chosen to listen. Listening had given her back her life. Her neighbors noticed too. Mr. Patel, who often sat on his porch with the newspaper, raised a hand and called out, "You're glowing these days, Adele." She laughed, shaking her head, but she carried the compliment with her like a small treasure. Even strangers seemed to see it, the color in her cheeks, the sparkle in her eyes that had once been dimmed by worry. At home, Clara poured them both tea and said, "Mom, you don't realize it, but you're inspiring all of us." Adele smiled, almost embarrassed. "I'm just walking, Clara." But deep inside, she knew it was more than walking. It was a way of being. Each breath, each stretch, each orange she peeled or glass of water she drank had been a choice to honor her life. She wasn't just passing her days anymore, she was living them. One evening, as the grandchildren sprawled on the living room rug, Adele told them a story, not about fairy tales or princesses, but about herself. She told them how her legs had once grown heavy, how her feet swelled, how she was afraid of losing her sight. The children listened wide-eyed, and then she smiled and added, "But I learned something. The body always whispers before it shouts, and if you listen closely enough, you can change the ending." That night, after the children had gone home, Adele stood at the window, gazing at the stars. She felt the familiar warmth in her calves, the quiet rhythm of her heart. She knew life would still bring challenges, there would still be days of swelling, moments of fatigue, but she no longer feared them. She had tools now, her walks, her breath, her food, her rituals, and most importantly, her belief. For Adele, renewal was not about chasing youth, it was about choosing presence, choosing care, choosing life in each ordinary moment. And as she drifted into sleep, she felt certain of one thing. Tomorrow, she would rise again, lace her shoes and walk forward, into strength, into hope, into whatever years were waiting with open arms. The summer sun poured gently through Adele's curtains as she woke earlier than usual. For years, she had dreaded mornings, her legs heavy before the day had even begun. But now there was anticipation in the air, almost like the feeling of opening the bakery at dawn all those years ago. She rose slowly, stretched her arms, and noticed something she hadn't felt in a long time, an eagerness to step into the day rather than hide from it. Her routine had become familiar, yet it was no longer mechanical. She slipped on her stockings, laced her shoes, and walked down the street with a steadiness that seemed to hum through her whole body. Passing neighbors waved, and she waved back, realizing with quiet pride that she had become the walking woman of the neighborhood. There was a time when she would have been embarrassed by that title, afraid people were noticing her weakness. But now she carried it like a badge. It wasn't just her legs that were changing, it was her spirit. Adele found herself humming again as she worked in the kitchen, savoring the bright colors of the fruits and vegetables she now filled her basket with. She had rediscovered the joy of chopping fresh herbs, of drizzling olive oil over roasted beets, of squeezing lemon into her water. Food had once been comfort in its simplest, sometimes heaviest form. Now it was part of her healing. Each bite felt like a promise she was keeping to herself. Clara noticed the difference. One afternoon she said, "Mom, you don't just look better, you look lighter." Adele laughed, setting down the knife she was using to slice cucumbers. "Lighter? At my age?" Clara shook her head with a smile. "Not your body, your spirit, like you've set something down you've been carrying for years." Adele thought about it. Maybe it was true. Maybe she had set down the fear, the silent weight of believing decline was inevitable. She was no longer waiting for sickness. She was walking toward life. Her grandchildren became part of this rhythm too. Daniel begged to ride his bike alongside her morning walks, and little Lily insisted on stretching beside her, giggling when her toes barely touched her knees. Adele didn't correct them, didn't teach, she simply joined them. Their laughter mixed with her steady breath, and in those moments, she felt decades melt away. She wasn't the grandmother with swollen ankles anymore. She was a companion, a teacher without trying, a woman showing them that strength doesn't end with age. One evening, as twilight deepened, Adele sat in her garden listening to the crickets. She thought about the word her doctor had once used, edema, a word that had frightened her, haunted her at night. Now it was just a memory, a reminder of the turning point that had brought her here. She had not erased the condition, no, her legs still asked for care, her body still whispered its needs. But she no longer met those whispers with dread. She met them with curiosity, with kindness, with action. And in that shift, Adele discovered something deeper. Her life was not defined by avoiding illness, but by embracing vitality wherever she could find it. Whether it was in the breath she slowed, the food she chose, the laughter she shared, or the steps she took, each moment was a piece of renewal. Each day, she realized, was another chance not to chase youth, but to live fully in the gift of the present. As the stars began to appear, Adele whispered softly into the night, "I am not done yet." And for the first time in years, those words felt less like defiance and more like truth. It started small, almost without Adele realizing it. One morning, as she finished her walk, she noticed Mrs. Chen from across the street, watching from her porch. "You're out early again," Mrs. Chen called, smiling warmly. Adele waved, a little shy. "Just trying to keep these legs alive," she joked. But the next day, Mrs. Chen laced her sneakers and joined her for the first few blocks. She was slow, leaning on her cane, but Adele matched her pace. They walked in silence, two women carrying years in their bodies, and when they parted ways, Mrs. Chen said softly, "I'll see you tomorrow." That simple moment was the beginning. Soon, Adele noticed more neighbors waving, then joining, until her quiet morning ritual became something else entirely. A small group of seniors from the neighborhood began to meet outside Adele's gate at sunrise, each with their own aches, their own stories, their own fears. Adele never asked for this, never planned it, but she welcomed them with the same warmth she had once offered customers at her bakery. "One step at a time," she told them. "That's all we need." Clara couldn't hide her amazement. One evening, as she passed the group returning from their walk, she whispered to her mother, "You've started a club, Mom." Adele laughed, shaking her head. "I've started nothing, I just walk." But deep inside, she felt something stirring, a quiet pride she hadn't known she was capable of. She wasn't just walking for herself anymore, she was walking for all of them. During one of their rest breaks, sitting together on a low garden wall, Adele listened as her new companions shared their struggles. Mr. Patel admitted his doctor had warned him about high blood pressure. Mrs. Chen confessed her fear of falling kept her from walking alone. Another neighbor, Harriet, said she hadn't been able to bend her knees without pain for months. Each story echoed Adele's own in some way, the swelling, the stiffness, the quiet dread. She realized then that what she had once believed was her private battle was, in truth, a shared one. She began to weave small lessons into their walks, not lectures, never instructions, just stories. She told them how she once thought her swollen ankles meant the end of her independence, how her doctor explained that even the smallest calf raise was a gift to her veins. She shared how her breath became her medicine, how her grandchildren laughed with her as they practiced breathing together, and each time she spoke, she saw it. The spark of recognition in their eyes, the easing of fear, the gentle return of hope. One Saturday, Clara snapped a photo of the group as they paused beneath the oak trees, sunlight filtering through the leaves. Later that evening, she showed Adele the picture, 6 seniors, smiling, leaning on one another, alive in the morning light. Adele stared at it for a long moment, tears filling her eyes. She never thought her journey would ripple outward like this. She had only wanted to survive her own fear, and yet, here they were. Proof that healing could spread quietly, like the scent of bread rising in an oven, filling more than just one home. That night, as Adele prepared for bed, she felt the now familiar warmth in her legs. But it was different this time. It wasn't just blood moving through her veins, it was purpose. She whispered into the darkness, "We're healing together." And for the first time in her long life, Adele understood something simple and profound. Strength was never meant to be kept alone. Autumn arrived with a crisp breeze, and along with it came the town's annual harvest festival. For years, Adele had watched from her porch as families strolled down Main Street, children with painted faces, music drifting from the park. She had rarely joined in, her legs too heavy, her spirit too weary. But this year felt different. Clara urged her, "Mom, you should come. Show everyone how far you've come." Adele hesitated, nervous about the crowds, but deep inside, she knew she wanted to step into this new season of her life with open arms. The morning of the festival, Adele dressed carefully, pulling on her stockings beneath a soft wool skirt, lacing her sturdy shoes. When she stepped outside, her walking group was already gathered. Mrs. Chen with her cane, Mr. Patel in his cap, Harriet leaning lightly on her walker. "Ready, Adele?" Mrs. Chen asked, her eyes shining. Adele smiled, feeling her heart lift. Together, they walked toward Main Street, the crisp leaves crunching underfoot, the sound of distant laughter drawing them closer. When they reached the festival, Adele felt a wave of surprise. People noticed them. Neighbors she hadn't spoken to in years came up with wide smiles. "Look at you all," one woman exclaimed. "You're glowing." Children darted past, and Adele's grandchildren ran to her, wrapping their arms around her waist. "Grandma, you made it," Daniel shouted, his face painted like a tiger. Adele laughed, pulling him close. In that moment, she realized this was not just a walk, it was a celebration. The group wandered through the festival slowly, pausing at stalls of apples and warm cider. A band played folk music in the distance, and Clara captured a photo of Adele mid-laugh, her cheeks rosy, her eyes alive. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt so present, so much a part of the world around her. For so long, she had lived as if her body were her cage. Now it felt like her companion, carrying her through life's simple joys. As they rested on a bench near the park, Harriet leaned over and whispered, "Adele, you've given us back something we thought was gone. We wouldn't be here without you." Adele felt her throat tighten. She shook her head, but Harriet pressed on. "You showed us that even when the body falters, it can find its rhythm again. You gave us permission to hope." Adele didn't know what to say. She simply held Harriet's hand, the two of them sitting in silence, their hearts speaking louder than words. That evening, as the festival lights twinkled overhead and the crowd thinned, Adele walked home slowly with Clara at her side. The streets glowed with the warmth of lanterns, and the air smelled of roasted chestnuts. She thought about the years she had spent hiding from these moments, letting her fears keep her away. And now she had walked through them, one careful step at a time, and found herself not weaker but stronger, woven into the life of her town, her family, her community. When they reached the house, Clara hugged her tightly. "Mom," she whispered, "you've turned your healing into a celebration." Adele closed her eyes, breathing in the autumn night. "No," she said softly, "we all did. Together." That night, lying in bed, Adele felt her legs warm beneath the blanket, her heart steady in her chest. She had walked farther than she ever thought possible, not just down streets, but through fear, through change, through renewal. And as she drifted to sleep, she carried with her the sounds of laughter, music, and life, proof that healing, when shared, becomes something much greater than survival. It becomes joy. In Adele's story, we saw how one woman moved from fear into renewal. What began with swollen ankles and sleepless nights slowly transformed into a rhythm of healing, one step, one breath, one small ritual at a time. She learned that movement wasn't just about exercise, but about helping her heart do its quiet work. And she discovered that even something as simple as steady breathing could soften fear, calm stress, and open her body to flow again. Her second transformation was deeper still. What started as a private struggle became a shared strength. Adele's walks drew others out of their homes, her story inspired neighbors, and her healing rippled across her family and community. She realized she was not only walking for herself, but for everyone who needed proof that it's never too late to begin again. Perhaps that is the invitation waiting for all of us. To listen more closely to the whispers of our own bodies, to choose small movements over stillness, presence over fear, and hope over resignation. We may not control the years we are given, but we can shape how we walk through them, step by step, breath by breath. So tonight, as you reflect on Adele's journey, ask yourself, what is one small promise you can keep to your body tomorrow? A walk, a breath, a moment of stillness, a healthier choice on your plate. The transformation doesn't happen all at once. It happens in the quiet moments, repeated with love. And remember, healing is never about chasing youth. It's about embracing the life still waiting inside you. Just as Adele did, you too can step forward into strength, into hope, and into the days yet to come.